Welcome to Revelation Unraveled. I'm your host, William Tapley, also known as the third eagle of the apocalypse and the co-prophet of the end times. On this program, I would like to raise a question. Will God send us any more warnings before World War III? Now, He has already warned us through the Triple Crown prophecies of last year, to the miraculous cloud that was shown over Moscow, the sycamore tree prophecies, the airplane prophecies, prophecies in the Bible like Daniel, where the ram takes on the goat, and the king of the north versus the king of the south, that is Putin versus Obama, and in the book of Revelation, where the whore of Babylon sits astride the scarlet beast, which is capitalism controlling communism. All of these images, all of these prophecies are warnings from God about World War III. Let's take a look at St. John's cryptogram to see if there are any clues about whether God will give us any more warnings about World War III, or have we seen the last of them? As you know from a previous program, St. John organized the 15 end-time chapters, that is numbers 6 through 20, into a secret cryptogram. He broke these passages up into 36 subsections and rearranged them so that 9 sections follow each of the 4 horsemen. Now, all of the 9 sections that follow the first horse, that is the white horse of apostasy, have already occurred. Now, when Jesus opens the first seal, He releases the white horse of apostasy, which can also be called the white horse of deception. That's because this horse corresponds with what Jesus says in the Olivet Discourse, where He warns people, "Let no man deceive you." This white horse began its ride very soon after the birth of Christianity, because there were deceivers from the very earliest days. Now, the 5th seal which Jesus opens refers to the innocent martyrs who are slain under the altar. Now, this martyrdom also began early, but not as early as the early Christian martyrs, because these martyrs cry for vengeance, whereas the early Christian martyrs, like St. Stephen, did not seek vengeance upon their tormentors. They said, "Father, forgive them." Now, following the 5th seal comes the first trumpet, and this refers to Henry VIII. Henry VIII is a precursor of the Antichrist, because he is a secular leader who took upon himself religious authority. In other words, he became the Pope of England. Following Henry VIII, we come to Martin Luther, who released the plague of locusts, which lasts for 5 months. This 5 months is actually 5 centuries. And since the 5 centuries began when Luther posted his 95 Theses in October of 1517, those 500 years are up in November of 2017, which will be the date for Armageddon. Now, following Luther, we come to the first part of the 20th century, because the great sign, a woman clothed with a sun, has actually already occurred when the Blessed Mother appeared to the children at Fatima. Following Fatima, we come to the first herald angel, and we see the gospel preached to all nations, kindreds, peoples, and tongues. Now, this refers to the explosion of knowledge, communication, and transportation during the early part of the 20th century. Following this angel, we come to the first bowl poured out upon mankind, and notice that there are martyrs who sing the canticle of Moses and who sing the canticle of the Lamb. This bowl refers to Adolf Hitler. Those who sing the canticle of Moses refer to his Jewish victims. Those who sing the canticle of the Lamb are, of course, his Christian victims. Following Hitler, we come to Stalin and the 5th bowl. Now, the God blasphemed refers to the atheism of communism. And the kingdom which goes dark refers to the great Russian culture which was destroyed by the Bolshevik Revolution. Now, that brings us up to the current time, where the 5th angel announces that the whore of Babylon rides the scarlet beast. The whore of Babylon refers to the United States and Great Britain. The scarlet beast refers to international communism. Now, as you can see, all these events on this top line are in general chronological order, but they are not in exact chronological order. So now let's look at the next event in the historical timeline, which will be World War III. Will God send us one more great warning about World War III? Now, when Jesus opens the second seal, he releases the red horse of war. And when he had opened the second seal, there went out a red horse, and power was given to its rider to take peace from the earth. So now let's look at the next event to see if the opening of the sixth seal is the first battle of World War III. And I beheld, when he had opened the sixth seal, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood, and the stars from heaven fell to the earth, and the heavens departed like a scroll when it is rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their place. Now, this certainly does not sound like a war. This is obviously a natural catastrophe. The mountains and the islands are moved. There is a great earthquake. The sun becomes black, and the moon becomes like blood. Everything about this prophecy indicates volcanic eruptions and earthquakes and things of that magnitude. And St. John continues, the kings of the earth and the great men hid themselves in caves. And they said to the mountains, fall on us, and save us from the face of him that sits on the throne, and from the wrath of God. So this is not a man-made war. This is the wrath of God. This is the warning that I believe God is going to send us. Now let's look at the next event on St. John's cryptogram. And the second angel sounded the trumpet, and as it were, a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea, and a third part of the sea became blood. Now notice that this flaming mountain is not the same as the mountains that we saw in the previous passage, because St. John writes, as it were a mountain. I believe here St. John is definitely talking about World War III. I believe this flaming mountain is nuclear warfare. And he continues that a third part of the creatures which had life in the sea died, and a third part of the ships were destroyed. Again, the ships being destroyed sounds like deliberate warfare. This does not sound like a volcano or an earthquake or a tidal wave. So now the question is, does this passage, which shows the commencement of World War III, does this follow the warning of the previous passage? Now, it may sound obvious that it would, but not necessarily. The reason I say not necessarily is because if we look again at the first events which followed the white horse of apostasy, we find that St. John has them occasionally reversed chronologically. For example, we found that Henry VIII came before Martin Luther, and although they were generally contemporaneous, actually Martin Luther preceded Henry VIII by a few years. And over here we notice that Hitler is shown before Stalin, but we know that the Bolshevik Revolution actually preceded the Nazis by a few years. In other words, God has already given us more than enough warnings to prevent World War III. The warning St. John is talking about, which follows the ride of the red horse, may well be a warning that occurs after the beginning of World War III. And it is a warning to mankind to stop the war, rather than a warning to prevent the war. And if you would like more information, simply write to the address you see on your screen.